What's going on, boxing fans? It's Jordan Williams with The Distance. I'm here to talk about or give you a fantasy matchup for today. This is 130 Floyd Mayweather Jr. versus 130 Julio Cesar Chavez. Super featherweight fight. This is kind of a different style Floyd Mayweather Jr. As we're used to seeing him. As we all know, Floyd Mayweather Jr. is perhaps one of the most skilled and technical fighters of all time. But at the same time, Julio Cesar Chavez, is one of the most, one of the toughest, most rugged opponents of all time. Had a great chin, and had power behind his shots as well. Had very good resilience, very good heart, as you could say. Honestly, I don't even want to stay long in this fight, because when I look at it, when I think about it, this is a fight that's a little bit, I think it's a little bit easier to examine and analyze. A lot of people, when you think of boxer versus brawler, a lot of people tend to choose the boxer in the situation. But Julio Cesar Chavez had a good chin, and he had pretty good skill for a fighter, who a lot of people consider one of the best brawlers of all time. Floyd at 130 took a lot of risk. Floyd at 130 fought more than he does now. Floyd at 130 wasn't as technical as Floyd at 135 and 147 is. So this is a different variation or incarnation of Floyd Mayweather Jr. than we're used to seeing. But we have seen Floyd Mayweather Jr. hurt in fights. Fight hurt, not necessarily hit, stunned, or whatever, because his defense was so good and he was so elusive that he just, fighters weren't able to touch him. Would Julio Cesar Chavez be able to touch Floyd Mayweather Jr. with a powerful right hand? Because Chavez did a very good job of lunging in with the right hand, lunging in, getting his right hand off, or whatever, or I'm going to the body. Floyd at 130 was, like I said, was a totally different fighter. Hands down, perhaps one of the best 130-pound fighters of all time. Hands down. Had some really good names on his resume, and a lot of fighters weren't even willing to fight him at 130. But if you put Julio Cesar Chavez in the mix, it's a different fight for Floyd Mayweather Jr. A lot of people think Floyd would pot shot his way to victory. I wouldn't say Floyd pot shots his way to victory. I think with Floyd, how he fought at 130, because it wasn't until he got to 135 when he started to fight a bit differently. When he started to fight a little more cautiously. When he messed up his rotator cuff in the fight against Jose Luis Castillo. As we all remember, he was in some wars at 130. I know a lot of people didn't forget the Jesus Chavez fight. That was a pretty good scrap. Just imagine a fighter in his prime a little better, much better than Jesus Chavez, who is Julio Cesar Chavez, no relation, of course. But Julio Cesar Chavez, had a better chin, had power in both hands. Though he was flat-footed, though he was a bit flat-footed, he had, like I said, he had a great chin. I think he could take some of Floyd's best shots at 130. It was at the smaller weight classes. I thought I don't think any fighter would knock out Julio Cesar Chavez. But at the same time with Floyd had good hand speed, good defense, good footwork. He could change it up at 130. He changed it up more often at 130 than he did at 135, 147. He could brawl, he could box, he could counter. He had a lot in the bag at 130. And I'm not saying he doesn't have anything in the bag right now, but at 130, he was just like I said, he was a different fighter. He took a lot of risk. And against Julio Cesar Chavez, you can't take risk the way that Floyd did. Because let's face it, if you look at his 130 fights, he took a lot. He was basically fighting a lot of these guys and against a fighter that more than likely he's not going to be able to knock out. Though he did knock out Diego Corrales, who's a big puncher, but a big guy, who's my size, shrinking himself down to 130, just to fight. And another good victory, Angel Manfredi. Can't forget that fight against Angel Manfredi and Jesus Chavez in his prime. Those were some very good victories. And like I said, I didn't want to stay long on this subject or this topic, but me, I'm gonna go with Julio Cesar Chavez by knockout. I'd say in the later rounds, I think that Chavez knocks out Floyd Mayweather Jr. at 130, because I think, like I said, I think that Floyd took too many risks at 130. I think that honestly see Floyd outboxing Chavez for all those rounds. I see Chavez down the card, but I do see Chavez catching up to him and getting him with some good shots to the body, which could possibly slow him down and get him right in the chin. Because if when you think about it, there was that fight Floyd broke his hand, and if he really tries against Chavez, he would probably break his hand trying to knock out Chavez or whatever. But Floyd did have the option to box and brawl, whatever. But I just see Julio Cesar Chavez winning this fight by knockout, probably 10th or 11th round. But anyway, agree to disagree with me. Who cares? That was the distance. Thanks for watching. Peace.